Welcome to the Autism Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Janine Hershkovitz, and it's my goal to help you create a more peaceful home while living with autistic and neurodivergent loved ones. Each episode, we focus on a different room in the house and help you create a peace plan for your home. So let's get started. Hey friends, did you know that a study from the University of Iowa's Carver College of Medicine found that kids with autism spectrum disorder and an IQ of higher than 120 are 6 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts? That's an alarming statistic, and it just underscores the importance of understanding the unique challenges faced by gifted and neurodivergent children. So today we're in the therapy room, and I am thrilled to welcome our guest, therapist Erica Whitfield. As a specialist working with gifted and neurodivergent children and teens, Erica brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our discussion. In the episode today, we'll discover complexities of giftedness, the emotional and social struggles that these children encounter, and the role that parents and educators play in supporting their well-being. Erica will share her insights on things like executive functioning, perfectionism, how to handle school refusal, and the importance of empathy in helping these exceptional kids thrive. And be sure to listen till the end, where Erica and I will discuss her upcoming Happiness and Confidence Summit, which is a fantastic opportunity for parents and educators that are supporting children emotionally to gain valuable tools and strategies. And it's free. So join us for a conversation that's both enlightening and essential for anyone involved in the lives of gifted and neurodivergent children. So let's dive right in. Erica Whitfield, thank you for coming on the Autism Blueprint Podcast. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much, Janine. I'm really excited about today.
Great. I'm so glad that you could be here. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your background and what led you to specialize in working with gifted and neurodivergent kids and teens?
Oh, absolutely. So I have a history of working in the school system. I worked in the school system for about 10 years. And one thing that really inspired me to start working with the neurodivergent population, and I don't even think we were calling these kids neurodivergent back then, I don't think we had that term, was seeing how many kids were struggling in school who were just misunderstood. You know, I'd see kids who were digging in the dirt and they were told not to do that because it wasn't pro-social behavior. And we didn't realize that these kids were trying to meet sensory needs. I would see kids have these huge meltdowns in the classroom and be labeled as defiant when in reality they were struggling with asynchronous developmental issues, and were not able to respond at the levels that we typically see kids of a certain age respond. So to answer your question, there was so much misunderstanding about what neurodivergent kids needed and why they were doing the things that they did, that it really spoke to me. And that's why I champion around them now.
I love that. I love it. And so your private practice in Jacksonville, Florida, specializes in that population, correct?
Yes. So we work with gifted, creative, and high-performing kids, and most of our kids that come in are neurodivergent. They have been diagnosed with ADHD, autism, developmental issues, and, you know, they're also on that gifted spectrum. So it's interesting because going back to that misunderstood piece, a lot of the kids that come in, you know, they may be outperforming their peers academically, but socially and emotionally, they may be 2-3 grade levels behind. And so our population, again, is just misunderstood. So I love being able to educate people about what's going on here with this so that we can best support them.
I love that. So tell me a little bit about, a lot of times when a child is gifted, parents get, really excited and they want them to be challenged and things like that. Are all gifted children neurodivergent in some way, or where does that meet? Do you know what I mean?
That's an excellent question. And, you know, I heard someone say that we're all neurodivergent, you know, because none of our brains really operate the exact same way. But of course, there can be extremes to that. So if we're on a spectrum and all of our brains are working in different ways, there's still going to be groups of us that are more extreme than others. So we have our neurotypical end of that spectrum, and then we have our neurodivergent end of that spectrum. So, and I think it just depends on the child. Every gifted kid that I see, they say you meet one gifted kid and you've only met one gifted kid because they're all so different.
Uh-huh.
um, I've seen gifted kids who, like I said before, very high intellect, but struggling socially and emotionally. I've seen some gifted kids who academically in one subject are outperforming their peers, but in another subject they have a learning disorder, so they need academic accommodations, a 504 plan, an IEP plan to help support them. And I was in a group with one gifted kiddo, and she even said within the same subject she could tell the differences in her ability to be able to use her skills. So in reading, she could master vocabulary, excellent working memory, but when it came down to the comprehension piece of it, she really struggled. And so her teachers would accuse her of not trying hard on all of her assignments, when in reality, within the same subject, she had two very different sets of strengths, skills and vulnerabilities.
Wow. That's a great point, because we often think about, well, what subjects are they struggling with, rather than what concepts or what abilities is it executive functioning, things like that. Talk a little bit about where you see the most struggle in gifted kids.
Sure. I'd say hands down, well, two things. First, that social emotional piece, especially with our little ones. Um, just the other day, I'll tell a story. I had a fourth grader come in, and I love this kid. And we have a treasure wall in our office. And so it's kind of like when you go to our arcade and then you get to like go into the treasure room and just pick out what you want. We have a whole wall of treasure. And so he wanted two items. And I said, oh, it'd be great to have two items. You can only have one today, but you can get that other item next time. And you could just see him, and there was nothing defiant about it. He was just so upset. His eyes began to get super watery, and his face was flushed, and you could just tell emotionally he was having such a difficult time processing it. That's the piece about it. He's trying to process what's happening. And this fourth grader was having the emotional reaction that you would typically see from a kindergarten student. And that's where I see a lot of the struggle. And again, especially when you're in classrooms and people are saying how smart you are, and they're also holding you to this expectation for you to be also as emotionally intelligent too. And sometimes it's that piece just hasn't caught up yet. So that's a huge struggle that I see with our gifted kids. And then also what you just said with the executive functioning piece. So a lot of our kids naturally have just kind of known how to do things, but once anyone gets to a certain level, you start to become challenged. And if they haven't learned how to use those executive functioning skills like planning, um, getting organized, knowing how to stay focused, knowing how to prioritize and figure out what to do first, that's where we really start to see them struggle. And that's usually later on, middle school, high school. So in the beginning, emotionally struggling. Middle, high school, we really start to see that executive functioning piece play a big part in our gifted kids struggling.
Okay. And I know that we are also throwing around terms that you and I use every day, right? So explain a little bit about what is executive functioning.
Oh, love that question. Okay, so executive functioning, this is how I like to explain it. Our brains can only hold so much at any given point before things start to slip through the cracks. Even good things. We will even forget awesome things that have happened because our brains have to keep us focused on what's most important so we can get through each day. So, executive functioning skills are kind of like these personal assistants for our brain that help fill in those gaps, that help us put things on autopilot so that we're not forgetting things and so that we can still show up and take in the new information we need to take in while still not letting anything slip through the cracks. Example, having a list. So when there's this fun party at school, I'm not forgetting that I still need my pencils and my notebook and that assignment that's due. Um, Planning and preparing. So instead of just going through the week and realizing, oh, I don't have time to do this assignment because I have a soccer practice, Well, let's do that at the beginning of the week so we can say, hey, you got a soccer practice on Thursday, so you're not going to be able to study then. Let's pick the day that you actually can study. So it's all about preparation, and taking the stress off your brain. It's really executive functioning skills, in my opinion, is about taking the stress off of your brain because it can't do everything at once.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. And I find a lot of times with our clients, they've struggled for so long that they don't realize that the rest of us that maybe don't struggle with executive functioning, we use calendars, we use lists. I remember explaining to my daughter one time, like, you're not supposed to be able to hold all of this in your memory bank.
Exactly. And here's the issue. Now tell that to a gifted child who has an exceptional working memory. Because for the longest time, they have been able to keep all of these things in their memory. But we all get to the point where we're going to hit, our threshold for what we're capable of doing. And then when we hit that, that's when we need to bring in those executive functioning skills to help us and support us.
I love that. I love that. That's a great explanation, Erica. I absolutely love it. So the term gifted also is something that we throw around. What is your definition of a gifted child?
Yeah. When I think of gifted kids, I think of kids who have exceptionalities. I think of that kid who loves to hyper focus on learning about dinosaurs and being able to name every single type of dinosaur that's ever existed. I think of giftedness. It's not even just about like working memory and intellect either. There's also creative IQ. I think about our kids who paint these magnificent pictures, that they display in their school art gallery. I think about the emotional side because not all gifted kids struggle emotionally. Some have very high IQs, and sometimes they're struggling emotionally because their IQ is so high and their emotional IQ is so high. And they may not be able to understand why people aren't feeling as intensely as they're feeling. So I just think about the range of all the exceptionalities that we can have, our creative IQ, our intellectual IQ, our social emotional IQ. I think there's another one too that I can't even remember, but there's different ways to measure giftedness. And I even remember reading, it was an expert talking about, giftedness is so subjective because put any of us here in America, overseas on a boat somewhere and tell us to navigate our way home by using the stars. Okay, well, a lot of gifted kids over here may not be able to do that, So giftedness is also subjective just culturally as well.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Do you see a difference in cultures within the United States as far as giftedness and neurodivergence and how it presents?
Oh, I haven't done a lot of research in that area, but it's an excellent question. It's a very excellent question. And I would love to see what we would find with that, like looking at giftedness on a global level. I've seen no research about that, Janine, and we need to do that. If it's out there,
it, right?
Someone let us know.
I love that. Well, I know that I have read studies that show that the African American population is underdiagnosed with both giftedness and neurodivergence, and they just kind of fall through the cracks. Has that been your experience as well?
It's really interesting because we have a gifted quiz that we put together based off of some research that we found from Betts and Nyhart's older research. It came out in 1988, but it talked about the 6 different types of gifted kids. And don't let me forget your question, Janine. So the 6 gifted types, because I'll tie it into what you just asked. The 6 gifted types are, there's a successful type. It's all about, this is the student that's about making good grades. They perform well on standardized tests. They're super focused on school. There is the autonomous type. This is the type of, you just have their hands in a little bit of everything. They may be learning Japanese while learning how to play the guitar, while learning about all the different types of dinosaurs. They just kind of have their hands in everything and they float around from thing to thing. We have creative and challenging. And this is the type that I tend to find usually focuses their giftedness on one particular area. So maybe this is just the writer and all of their time and attention goes into writing, or this is the dancer, all of their time and attention goes into the dancing. We've got the twice exceptional, gifted with a developmental disorder or learning issue. Two more types. We have the dropout risk, and this is the type that doesn't feel connected to school. So they may either decide not to go to college and start their own business, or they could find themselves living with their parents a little bit longer while they're still gaining skills and figuring out what they want to do in the future. And then the final is the underground. And the underground does not want you to know that they are gifted. They intentionally hide their gifts. And it's interesting when you ask about the African-American population, and I won't speak for everyone, but for the African-American boys especially that have come into my office, I've noticed that they have scored a little higher on that underground. And so I think that's super interesting. So these are gifted individuals, high IQ, but for whatever reason, they're identifying with the underground. My son identifies, he's a weird hybrid. He's the successful type and also the underground. So it's very, very interesting. And I'd love to see more research done on that and why that's happening.
Yes. Oh, thank you for breaking that down. I did not realize there were so many different types of gifted kids. I remember, now we're going back a ways because I grew up in the 70s and 80s, but I was tested in the early 80s in elementary school for, the gifted program. And I didn't qualify. Well, I wasn't a great test taker. But then I thought to myself, well, like nobody explained it to me either. It's like nobody sat me down and said, this isn't the only measure of how smart you are.
Right.
But I wasn't accepted into the program with the other, 5 kids in my class that got to take special trips and do special things. And, they were treated very special.
Right. I remember that.
Right? Do you remember that? Like and if you didn't make the
classroom like you, like watching them go off to their like fun activities.
Right. Yes. And it just was so, I know we've learned a lot since then, but still I was left feeling like, well, I'm not one of the smart kids, so I will just overperform until I become one of the smart kids. Do you see that often? Do you see things like anxiety and perfectionism playing a role in the lives of these kids?
Oh, 100%. 100%. So, a lot of the kids that come in, and you'll really, as young as kindergarten, you'll start to see the issues with perfectionism emerge. And with the little ones, it just looks like the anxiety just looks like having to get things done perfectly with their schoolwork. So like we'll have the girls that come in and they'll just erase. They'll draw one line and that line isn't perfectly drawn. So they'll erase it and they'll do it again and they'll do it again. Over and over and over, this repetitive behavior. Let's say they get almost to the end of an assignment that they're working on. They make a mistake on it. That paper gets taken and ripped up and balled up. And they're like, Miss Erica, I need another sheet of paper. So, we start to see this difficulty with accepting that they may not be right about something too. And then also difficulty with identifying with feelings that make us feel uncomfortable. So when the little ones come in, I have these feelings cards that I'll spread out, and it's always, I'm happy, I'm excited, I'm joyful. And it's like they want nothing to do with the feelings of sad, angry, guilty, nothing to do with that. So those are some of the things that I see with the younger kids. And then with the older kids, as that work starts to increase in difficulty, I see a lot of giving up. So if I don't get the assignment turned in on time, I'm not going to turn it in at all. And maybe if I still turned it in, I would have gotten some points, but nope. If I can't get the grade that I wanted, that A, then I'm not going to turn it in at all. Last thing, it never fails. Every year, I will get about 2 to 3 parents, and they'll call me, and they'll say, my child has not been to school. These are gifted kids, high-performing kids. My child has not been to school in 3 weeks. and I don't know what to do. And what's happened is they've made their first B, okay, talking about perfectionism. These are kids who have maybe made straight A's from kindergarten to 11th grade. They've now made their first B, and they don't know what to do, and it can make them fall into serious bouts of depression and anxiety.
Wow. That's it. And I just, I want to add to that it is not necessarily anything the parents are doing wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And do you have parents bringing in kids to your office, just kind of saying, I just don't know. I don't know what to do here. I don't know what's wrong. And it's that situation you just described.
Right. And what's happening is that these kids are having trauma responses, and we think, oh, it's just academics, it's just school. When you tell me that your child is underneath their bed in a fetal position, shaking vigorously because they are that fearful to show up to school, to face what's in front of them that day, that's a trauma response. So they're going into like these fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses, and the parents don't know what to do because they'll go to their kids. Okay, the fight response is, parents will say, hey, what about the work? I see you've got some low grades here. What's going on? I've never seen this with you before. And the kids may get angry and aggressive. Leave me alone. I've got this under control. I don't need any help. The flight response, maybe they're just avoiding the work and they're not doing it. The freeze response, I don't know. I don't know why this is happening. I don't know. And then the fawn response, which is the people pleasing. Oh, don't worry, Mom. I already turned that in. It's fine. And they haven't turned it in. They have not turned it in. So the parents are seeing all these different survivor responses and they're confused. They don't know what to do. And especially with the fawn response, because the kids are saying it's under control. And for all these years, it has been under control. So why wouldn't I believe my child when they tell me that? But then, usually it's when their kiddos are to the point where they haven't been to school in like 2-3 weeks that the parents finally go, okay, this isn't right. Yeah. Your grades are still low. We got to get you help here.
Wow. So in that situation with school refusal, because I know we have a lot of parents in our office too that struggle with this with their kiddos, what advice would you have for a parent that's dealing with that? How should they handle it?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. So there's a balance here. Like, number one, please go get your child professional help at this point. They need to be talking to a therapist. And I wouldn't say, and the parents I'm talking to who are experiencing this have probably already gone through this, but this is for the ones who haven't. Don't try to force your kids to go either, because if you do, you're really going to see some behavior that you have maybe never seen before. Because when we talk about like this trauma and the survivor responses, your child may seriously be feeling like their life is in danger, like there is significant threat to them if they get up and try to go to school. And so the first thing you want to do is get a professional around them so that they can establish some safety. Contact the school and let them know what's going on and say, my child is really struggling right now. I need to know how they can still kind of keep up as best as possible in school while we get them to a therapist and figure out how to help them get through this time. And when the right supports are in place, they can get back in there. Or if it's to the point where things are very significant, we can look at something like virtual school or at-home school options. But I'd say be very careful about using force or threats to try to get them to go to school, because it's really not even about that at this point. It's about their survival. They don't feel safe.
I'm so glad you said that. And I have a son, which I've shared with my audience before. He's limited verbally. And when he decided he wasn't going to school anymore, he was about 16, I think. And he couldn't tell me why, but he just flat out, there was no getting him there. There was no forcing him. He's bigger than me. And there was no way I could get him there. So we did switch to more, to homeschool at that point. And, luckily had a lot of support from the school to be able to do that. But it was very challenging as a parent, because as a parent, you feel like, oh my gosh, if I can't get my child to school, what kind of mom am I?
Right. And there's so much judgment out there too from people who don't understand, like there's this idea of, well, what do you mean your child's refusing to go to school? You're the parent, make them go to school. Okay, well, I want you to imagine going to a place that absolutely terrifies you, a place that you don't think you can survive if you show up. And then let's see how easy it is for you to go to that place. So we have to have some empathy here for our kids too.
Yes, yes. And I think, I don't know about you, Erica, but I find that when we're honest with our kids and we accept where they are and say, I hear you, I believe you, I realize this is your experience, tell me more about it. Suddenly that child can start to let that guard down.
Right, absolutely. And, it was so beautiful what you just said, because what's happening there is you're giving voice to what they may not be able to verbally articulate. And now they can rest assured knowing that someone understands them and what they're going through.
Yes, yes. And I think that so often kids that are neurodivergent and or gifted get misunderstood a lot because they're not like everybody else.
Right, right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a mask that they have to put on. I put on my own neurotypical mask when I'm not feeling safe. I'm very neurodivergent, if you have not already been able to tell. But and it's exhausting. It's exhausting to have to show up, in these public spaces and not be yourself. It makes me sad when I have to walk into a room and act a little bit less joyful and more serious because I know the people around me are going to give me weird looks if I show up like this,
I know it. I know it. So yeah, the masking is a big part of that. Do you see a difference in girls versus boys in your practice?
When you stated that, the first thing that came to my mind was that a lot of our girls, as they get older, they'll go more into like that underground. So it may be a little bit more about fitting in. And then the research says too that the research says girls tend to go underground a little bit because they want to fit in, and that boys will pay less attention to academics because now they're getting into sports, and it can be flip-flop. Girls may be getting into sports, and so they're paying less attention. Boys want to fit into. It's interesting that when I see the girls and they come in and they're doing like play, like we're playing with figurines, when the girls play long enough, it's funny to me that I start to see like themes of aggression start to come out. And these are like girls who like, star student, have never like hurt a fly in the classroom, have never hit anyone else. And it almost makes me kind of wonder, like, are our girls repressing something here? Because sometimes in that play, things can get a little wild.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if they're acting out things that they feel like they have to suppress their mask, when they're out.
Oh, yes. I can totally see that. I mean, because as women, we're socialized to be nice and kind and pretty and, all of those things. So as a girl, you learn, when you're a child, how to fit in. And it's not that hard. You just have to put aside who you really are.
Right. Just that.
Just that. No biggie.
Yeah. And then, our boys, I feel like our boys are constantly getting in trouble in school for like getting up out of their seat and being aggressive and horse playing. And yes, we need to make sure that we're respecting the boundaries of our classmates. But there's also this piece of, it's also important for us to move and be able to have healthy interaction with other people for our boys and girls. So I'd love to see more movement being incorporated in schools. And I know the schools are starting to do that. Like, that's excellent. But I'd love to see even more.
Yes. Talk a little bit about movement and the sensory integration piece. How does that manifest in these kiddos?
It's so important that our kids be allowed to move. And, when I think about the neurodivergent kids that I work with, I think of two different categories. And one is our kids with hypersensitivity. So they are, they feel things more intensely than the rest of us. So bright lights may be very irritating to them, and loud sounds can be very dysregulating to their nervous systems. And so I'd love, okay, well, let me say the other piece and then I'll come back to that. And then I think about our kids with hyposensitivity. So they're not feeling that, they need more sensation. They need to take in more sensation to feel. So these are our kids who are giving us the super tight hugs and, they put their hand down, but it feels like they just bang something, and they give their friends a high five, but it's like a really intense slap across the hand. And they're not meaning to be overly aggressive. It's just that hyposensitivity. So I would love to be able to see schools incorporate things that speak to both needs. Schools that have accommodations for our kids who have the hypersensitivities and then the hyposensitivities too.
I love that. Speaking of schools, sometimes schools get a bad rap because sometimes we really have to fight for what our kids need because the school either doesn't understand it or doesn't want to give an accommodation. A lot of times, if kids aren't a behavior problem, the school doesn't see it as something that needs to be addressed. Has that been your experience as well?
100%. And I have look, I'm team homeschool when when the school system isn't working out, because I get both sides. I get the fact that we have one teacher in this classroom on average with about 20, maybe more kids. And I understand that that can be extremely difficult for you to have to cater to the needs of all the different kids in your classroom, or even just a handful that have exceptionalities. I get that. So I encourage parents, like, if the school isn't meeting your needs, let's look at some alternative options. Let's do homeschool if we can, if we're able to do that, so that we can make sure your child has what he or she needs. But at the same time, you can also run into situations at the school where there is like this very antiquated way of thinking. There's a lot of blaming that goes around of the kids. And I feel like the teachers think that it's a parenting issue, when in reality, that child could have calmed down in the classroom if he had have been allowed to have the amount of time he needed to calm down. So school just moves too quickly for a lot of our kids. And I get kids in here. There's a reason why kids don't have meltdowns in my therapy office. Very often, at least. Usually if there's a meltdown, it's like their first time here,
Right.
But there's a reason why when they had that meltdown, they didn't destroy my therapy office. At school, they're destroying the classroom. There's a reason, something's happening. And the difference is I can give them that one-on-one attention. I have the patience and I have the time to be able to attend to them while they emotionally regulate. And I'm not going to blame, I understand a teacher doesn't have time to do that. A teacher does not always have time to do that. There's so many other people in the classroom that have to be attended to. So I wish we had these extra supports that are needed.
Yeah. Do you see more often that for gifted kids, are they, the kids that are in school, are they utilizing IEPs or 504s? And can you tell us what the difference is for those that don't know?
Sure. Okay. So a lot of our gifted kids will have like gifted education plans, and then they may also have an IEP plan too. So the IEP plan, they'll usually use them to extend testing time so they can have more time to take test or take their test in a separate room where it's a bit more quieter. I feel with the gifted kids, you do have to remind them, though, to use their accommodations, because there's a lot of not wanting to be a burden. They don't want to burden the teacher by asking if they can use their accommodation, or they're nervous about reminding the teacher that they have an accommodation that can be used. They don't want to stand out. And what's another common issue? And then also there's this stigma of, oh, you're a gifted child. Well, why do you even need an accommodation? So right. We have to remind them that, like, no, your needs are important and valid too. And so use your resources.
I love that. Are there particular therapeutic approaches as a therapist that you find most helpful when working with the population that you do?
Definitely. Especially with the successful type, the research calls them the successful type gifted child. And this is the one who no one would probably ever think is struggling, because that's just how they present. the first thing that I think is most helpful is to educate them about the 6 different types of gifted kids, and then identify which type they feel they fit the most. And then that way I can go ahead and normalize things. So I can say, oh, look, you identify as the successful gifted type. This is the type that doesn't like to ask for help. This is the type that feels like they're a burden when they ask for help. So the work has already been done for them, right? They don't have to admit this, or maybe they don't even have the words to describe what's happening, but they can hear me not talk about them as an individual, but like this gifted profile type. And I went from some of these gifted kids who would come into the office years ago and they'd show up once and they'd say, I don't need any help, I'm fine, and I'd never see them again, to now they're showing up and they're going, oh yeah, that's me. I am that successful type. Yeah, I am a perfectionist. Yeah, I do struggle with imposter syndrome. You get it. And now they're working with me for months on end and they're making improvements. So education and normalizing in a non-threatening way is what I found is the most important thing to do.
I love that. Absolutely love it. Want to switch gears for a minute on another way that you will be helping parents this summer. You're hosting the Happiness and Confidence Summit, and I'm really proud and happy and excited to be a part of it. I'm one of the speakers at the summit, and so I'm going to link to everything in the show notes. But tell us a little bit about the summit, who it's for, and what participants can expect.
Absolutely. So we are hosting the Happiness and Confidence Summit. And this is a summit that is all about helping parents, teachers, anyone who works with kids on ways that they can help kids emotionally thrive. So, of course, we have you, Janine, who will be speaking on how to help our kids with autism. We're super excited about that. We have experts coming in that are going to be talking about how to help children and adolescents using nature-based techniques. We have an expert who will be speaking about how to establish behavior plans in school, great information you can use to take into those IEP meetings that you're going into. I'll be talking about how to help high-performing and gifted kids manage stress and anxiety. We've got an expert talking about how to help our kids develop freedom and independence, but still in healthy ways. So there's so many great topics that are going to be covered. It's going to be a virtual event that takes place on June 12th from 9 to 3. Most of the sessions will be recorded in advance, so you can watch them at your pace. And then we'll have a few live sessions happening throughout the day. And it's free to register.
That's the best part. It's free. That's wonderful. Wonderful. So yes, I will link to all of that in the show notes so that people can sign up if they want to. And I want to kind of close out our time by asking you, if every parent of a gifted neurodivergent child were listening, what would you want them to know today?
Oh, that's such a great question. Okay, let me think about that one. What would I want them to know? I would want them to know that they are amazing parents. The fact that they are just taking the time to listen, to the Autism Blueprint Podcast. The fact that they're taking time to learn more and educate themselves to help their children just shows how amazing they are. So that's what I would want parents to know. Give yourself grace, because you're doing what a lot of parents aren't even doing right now. You're going above and beyond to support your kids. And so you're amazing. And here's a better tidbit too. Keep a gratitude list too. I want you to know that when your kids have a win, or when you have a parenting win, get a little notepad out on your or digital notepad app on your phone and start keeping track of those wins. Because just like how we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, how our brains can only hold so much before we start forgetting, we forget about all the little wins that we're making every week. And we need to keep track of that so we can see how far that our kids have grown and how far we have grown as parents.
Oh my gosh. I love that, Erica. I'm going to start doing that. That's such great advice.
Janine, I've been keeping a gratitude list for 7 years now, 7 years. And I will go back on it, and there's huge things on there that I totally forgot about. And it makes you feel so good.
That's amazing. So do you have a particular method you use, or how do you do it?
I have a notepad app on my phone. And then whenever something great happens, I just go in there and just put a little one-liner in there. and 7 years worth of things in that list right now.
Wow. Oh, that's so cool to look back on. That's just amazing. And then because, as parents, we really need encouragement too. Nobody teaches us how to do this except you and me. We do teach people how to do this. But you have to seek it out sometimes. So that's wonderful. Erica, I'm so happy that you came on today and shared all of your expertise with us. I will link to the Happiness and Confidence Summit in the show notes. And I just wish you all the best. And thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
The information in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional.